for inviting me here today. I appreciate it more than you know. And to see so many people here, given all this going on in Washington, gives me hope. And that's a wonderful feeling, believe me. And I want to thank Cole Harrison for his leadership and for his passion on issues that are so important to me and to this country and to this world. My friend, longtime friend, John Mayer, who's been a great teacher to me and over the years, and Sheila Foreman, and I might go right through the list of all people in this audience who I've known in various capacities since I was an aide to Congressman Moakley. And Cole was nice enough to talk about the effort to end U.S. intervention in Central America. But I want to tell you something. That never, ever, ever would have happened if it weren't for people in this room in particular who put the pressure on the congressional delegation in particular to become active on that issue. I love Joe Moakley, but he'd be the first to tell you that if he wasn't being harassed by people every single week on the need to end the Contra war, on the need to get out of El Salvador, on the need for more rational policy, on a less militaristic policy in Honduras, I don't think he would have done it. It's just a fact. So I hope you appreciate the power that's in this room. And I, for one, just as a citizen, am grateful for what you have helped do. I think you've made our country better. And I also want to say that it's great to be here with Phyllis. Please, you will not insult me at all if you get up while I speak and buy her book. And I agree with virtually everything she said. And so it's great to be here with her. Look, I used to have a history professor who always used to end every class the same way. The world will not get better on its own. And I never quite appreciated the wisdom of those words when I was taking his class, but I do now. Because nothing ever changes. Nothing ever gets better unless like-minded people come together and demand change. I mean, it really is that simple. And when good people feel overwhelmed and discouraged, and kind of sit on their hands and, and stay home, then bad things tend to proliferate. So it's important that this movement continue and that we work with you to find ways to even strengthen it. I think that mass peace action has always understood that the world will not get better on its own. We just need to multiply you 1,000 times all across this country. And I think there are people like me and others who could be a little bit of wind at your back, and we need to figure out ways to do that. But it is easy to get discouraged. I mean, you turn on the TV, it's depressing. It's overwhelming. A nutty presidential campaign, and I'm being kind about that, where people are talking about increasing our role in torture, about carpet bombing entire populations. I mean, it is kind of off the charts crazy, to put it mildly. A Congress that, for most of the time, is pretty dysfunctional. There's a tension in this country between a newly energized right-wing movement and the growing awareness and activism to address issues like persistent racism and economic inequality, and to bring more attention to long neglected sectors of our society, including the poor and the vulnerable in this country. So, I sometimes myself kind of, wake up some days feeling like, what do you do about all this? And how do we make a difference? And it's within this difficult, and I guess to put a nice spin on it, interesting political climate, that I think those of us in this room who are part of the peace movement, need to kind of look at the defense and foreign policy issues with fresh eyes and kind of renewed commitment to really make a difference. I've always felt that we need a new definition of national security. Because when you listen to these campaigns, everybody talks about, I'm committed to national security, I'm committed to national security. Well, who isn't, right? We all want to be secure. There's no question about that. But when they say it's really code for, more investments in our military, more weapons, more troops deployed all around the world, more wars, their definition of maintaining national security is really to kind of do the same old, same old. And I think we need a new definition of national security. Because when people actually talk to me about national security, I mean, I talk about things like, a job for people, not just here in the United States, but around the world. I talk about, economic security. I talk about the purity of our environment and the need to recognize that climate change is for real, and that as good stewards of this planet, we have an obligation to come up with a plan to deal with it. You know, a lot of the conflicts in the world, by the way, some of them have to do with ancient, religious and ethnic struggles. Some of them have to do with fights over water, which are getting more and more intense because of this issue of climate change. So that's part of national security. Human rights is part of national security. When people are being discriminated against or persecuted because of who they are, whether they're members of the LGBT community, whether they're political activists who just disagree with their government, whether they're women who believe that they ought to have the same rights as men, when rights are being oppressed, there's no peace. And any one of us who get up all the time and who talk about all the problems with our government, and I'm glad that we do, because I think that is what patriotism is all about, but we wouldn't tolerate it if we were in a country and we were told you couldn't speak out, and if you did, you'd be jailed or you'd be tortured. So that's part of this issue as well. And so, as we look to the future, I think it's important that we learn from history. I think Phil has kind of outlined all the things that we have done poorly in recent years, and I think it's important that we not repeat the same mistakes. That we need to be careful as we move forward to avoid these unnecessary conflicts, but we are confronted with the reality that we're involved in a whole mess of unnecessary conflicts. And it's become very, very difficult to try to find our way out of it, out of some of these things. I was reading an article today, and it was talking about the fact that the United States is proposing to provide arms and training to 137 countries in FY 2017. And much of this aid that's going up in these weapons that are going all around to these various countries are going through initiatives in the Pentagon that really kind of sprung up after 2001. And it's confusing for members of Congress to follow all this stuff. It's confusing because there's very little reporting and very little transparency between the Pentagon and Congress. It's confusing because our oversight committees are not doing their job on this stuff. But, as Phyllis pointed out, I mean, some of these programs have largely failed. The Syrian Train and Equip program, I mean, unbelievably expensive, I think by any objective measurement, was a huge failure. We lost thousands of U.S. supplied military equipment to ISIS, thanks to our so-called allies in the Iraqi military forces who basically gave it to them. So we basically armed the people that we say are our enemies. We lost over $500 million in U.S. military equipment to Yemen, much of it which ended up in the hands of Al-Qaeda and the Houthi rebels. That's just another example. U.S. weapons have been used by Saudi Arabia and Bahrain to go against their own people. I've been pretty active on the issue of Bahrain, and it's really quite tragic. There's a government there that represents the minority of the country, but have inflicted incredible oppression on the majority. And I mean, they have jailed doctors who have treated people who have been beaten up by security forces who've gone to the hospital. They've arrested those doctors who treated them. And we just, lifted a ban on arms sales to Bahrain. And why do we do it? Because we have a military base in Bahrain. But, one of the things we need to kind of be committed to is that if we're going to do any military assistance around the world, one principle we should all embrace, and that is we ought to embrace the basic principle of do no harm. Whatever you do, don't make things worse for people. And I think that's we look at Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen, and dozens of other places where the U.S. military is deployed and engaged. we need to work harder on how we talk about peace and reconciliation. How do we advance peace and reconciliation? What does it mean when we talk about reconciliation? A lot of people, and people who think like me as well, we're guilty of this, we always talk about resolving our conflicts, coming up with a political solution, the need for political reconciliation. But I'll be honest with you, I don't always have the details about what political reconciliation looks like, or how do you advance that. And in Afghanistan, I visited there several times, and everyone there says, ultimately there's not a military solution to be had. Ultimately there's a political solution. Well, where the hell is it? It's the longest war in U.S. history. And I appreciate the fact that President Obama talked about ending our involvement in Afghanistan, but our political solution now includes the U.S. staying there forever. We're involved in endless wars. I mean, we're not even involved in wars anymore that, have an end date. It's endless, at a tremendous cost and a very questionable impact. As Phil has pointed out, I mean, the Taliban's getting stronger, not getting weaker. The terrorists that we claim that we want to defeat are growing in numbers. They're not shrinking. Yes, we have the biggest bombs in the world. There's no question about that. But I think after all this time, we ought to understand that if you're going to try to help encourage stability and peace in different parts of the world, it can't be done through dropping bombs and using drones and sending troops and encouraging more and more war. It just doesn't work. And so it's there for us to see. In Iraq, I was there last July. And one of the things that bothers me is I saw little or no interest by any of the major players, whether it was the government or the Sunnis leadership or the Kurds, to embrace any kind of political reconciliation. I ask all the time, tell me what your plan is for political reconciliation. Tell me, how do we all get along here? Because quite frankly, ISIS wouldn't exist in a country, where vacuums weren't created. And that's what's happened in Iraq. And they all looked at me like I had 3 heads. What are you talking about? What we need is more weapons. The Sunnis went so far as to say, we want to be put back on the payroll. And the Kurds asked more weapons. And it's like, well, what is that going to solve? Nothing. And so I think that the reality is that we need to look at these things differently. In Syria, I mean, the same thing is true in Syria, where the civil conflict has allowed ISIS to seize territory and create strongholds from which it could launch operations in Syria and Iraq and now Yemen and in Libya. The current ceasefire, I've got our fingers crossed. It's fragile and it's imperfect, but at least it stopped the bombing. When I in July I also went to the Syrian border and met with a lot of the refugees coming into Turkey in this place called Gaziantep, and everybody I talked to basically said the same thing. They didn't really talk about government, ISIS, Russia, but all they said the same thing: stop the bombing. Stop the bombing, because the more you bomb, the more difficult it is for us to have any semblance of civil society. You all talk about, trying to give us the opportunity to control our own destiny, but the fact of the matter is we can't do that when this bombing is going on constantly, not only by the government, but by Russia, France, the United States. Everybody's bombing in Syria. And if you don't want refugees, then stop the bombing. Because people cannot live in a country that is constantly under attack. So, we need to figure out, we need to realize that the way forward in Syria, is not going to be through a military solution, nor is it going to be through a U.S.-imposed political solution. Because the other point I just want to make, and I think it's hard for people in the United States to sometimes appreciate this fact, those aren't our countries. Syria is not the United States, Iraq is not the United States, Afghanistan is not the United States. We should help support civil society and strengthen civil society so people can, determine their own futures. But the future of those countries, the future of any country outside our own, quite frankly, is up to the people who live there. We got to figure out how to control our own politics here in this country. But our job should not be to say, here's your president and here's your prime minister and here's, no, that's up to the people who live there. Phyllis talked about the issue with Israel. It's a very difficult issue, I'll be honest with you, in Congress. And it's very difficult to talk about. People are very polarized on that issue. I did boycott Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech, and but I got to tell you, I did so really out of sadness and regret, because I thought it was such a destructive thing for him to do, to try to politicize the joint session of the Congress speech, and to do it right before his own political campaign. I didn't want to be an extra in a political commercial, but also trying to undermine the Iran nuclear peace deal. It is in Israel's interest to have a nuclear-free Iran. It is in our interest, it is in the world's interest to have a nuclear-free Iran. And I thank God that the president, stayed the course, and that we had enough people, to back him up on that, so that it couldn't be derailed by the Republicans in Congress. But it is working. It is working. And we need to make sure that it continues to move forward. And I think, I'll just say this, look, it bothers me greatly that, any talk about peace agreements has been kind of sidelined for now.